Alright, me. It is late July, and over the course of yesterday and then like an hour today, I finished reading Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. This is one I definitely remember reading at some point. This probably would have been late elementary school to early middle school when I read this, because I also read 20,000 Leagues around the same time, which was also around that time period. But yeah. Um, I feel like I mentioned this before with Around the World in 80 Days, also by Jules Verne, but like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells are more or less writing around the same time. I don't remember the exact time periods. And H.G. Wells falls much more into the fantastical sci-fi, right? Whereas this and most Jules Verne stuff falls into what is generally referred to as more grounded sci-fi, or low sci-fi, right? Which is usually this whole idea of what ideas and concepts are we on the verge of understanding or seeing, and then exploring those things, right? And so within the Journey to the Center of the Earth, right, is right around, I believe, and they constantly make note of one specific geologist, and for the life of me I can't remember who it is, but it devolves into what has been previously mentioned in the Tunnels series about the whole idea of where Earth's crust is actually more or less this kind of floating level based on tectonics, and what is actually underneath is not this molten shifting world, but rather almost like an air pocket that exists. And so you have an entire second world underneath the crust, right? And this is another story that goes into that then, right? So you got that going for it, right? Is that this whole idea that it is in some way low sci-fi and therefore somewhat based in some sort of possible conclusions that can be drawn, right? Which is a very strange way to look at it, but you know, that is what it is. And then you get into like some like possible explanations for how this happens, for how this occurred, right? You have the whole air pocket situation, which then we solve the issue of there being plant and water and animal life by the idea that when this was forming, right, therefore the top level will also still be forming, and then you could have giant fissures that would then allow things and sedimentary and living beings to then filter down into this second level, which then is their explanation for why everything can occur down here, right? And then you have what effectively becomes the explanation for why the heat isn't so enormous down there, right? There are 30 leagues, 50 leagues, whatever it is at that point, underneath the surface of the Earth. Why is the pressure not boiling them alive? And basically the explanation becomes, well, because water is such a great conductor, right, and it can absorb so much heat, that basically the water is constantly almost at boiling, but because it is absorbing all of the heat, everything else feels fine. That kind of becomes the explanation for it, which then gets explored in a couple different points, right? But it's you know, that's that. Within the story itself, right, it's I mean, it is an adventure story, right? That is inherently what this is, right? And so you have lots of the same kind of detail based on that, right? Which isn't anything special. Right? You have the, I should say, right? The way that we experience this book through, right, is unlike all of the, or I should say all, but the more modern interpretations of this book in movie form, right, is that there are only three characters that end up going through this, right? And there's a fourth character that is named that doesn't go on this, but does go on, and I believe is the fourth character that gets added into the modern versions of this. So the three characters that go on this journey is that you have Axel or Harry. This is another weird thing of the Jules Verne, obviously writing in French. I believe French. It could be German, but I believe French. And so he has these character names that are pretty anglicized or pretty Germanicized and could be very easily seen. But then this first translation, this is a version of the first translation, they changed the names of all the characters besides Hans, but all the other characters have different names for no real reason. And so like this version has Professor Hardwig and Harry as our two main, plus Hans, who's the third traveler. In the original, it is Axel, who is the person that we experience through, and Professor Lindenbrock is the professor, is his uncle. What is very strange, though, is that this version that I specifically have has the translated names in the book, but the back text is the original names. And so like I was like halfway through the book and I was like, I finally read the back, but I was like, this makes, what's happening here? So I don't dive on that to figure that out. But so those are three main characters that actually go on this journey. The fourth character, who I would have loved to have on this journey, is called Gretchen. And Gretchen is Harry's / Axel's cousin and fiance. Separate world. And is like a character that is like what is really strange is that like Harry / Axel is very concerned about this trip when he learns about it, when he figures it out, when he is, you know, he decodes this ancient scroll that has this secret on it, and he becomes terrified. But when Gretchen hears of this, Gretchen's like all about it. Gretchen's so excited. Gretchen would love to go on this. Gretchen wants to so badly take this journey. And it is specifically stated in the book that the reason that she can't is because she is a woman. And it's one of those very like disheartening things of like, oh, this is a character that would have been way better to read and to invest our time into, rather than Harry. So that's that. The actual way the story gets portrayed is that you have, right, Harry becomes the layman, is the everyman in the situation, of like, he is intelligent in many ways, but he's also very scared, right? Because everything that is happening makes no sense to scientific study. You have the Professor Hardwig / Lindenbrock, who, I mean, is effectively Sherlock Holmes-esque, of just knows everything and knows everything constantly, and has solutions to everything. And then you have Hans, and this is where probably my read of this is probably the most different, because to me, this book is like how white colonialists want colonization and expansionism to exist, of where they get to stumble into and explore and create everything on their own, and that what is there is mystifying and great and grand and wonderful, but also they aren't harming anything in doing so, right? It is just an open world for them to explore. And you do it all where the person who is helping you and supporting you the most is someone who is effectively the myth of Sacagawea, or the myth of that was the Native American that, oh God, with the Mayflower and the teaching of the planting of the corn and whatnot. Fuck, that's embarrassing that I forgot that name. Squanto. I'm pretty sure off the top of my head. I've tried to think about that for a very long time. Right, but it's like within that mythology of, oh, here's someone that is native to the land and knows a lot of the land and does everything for us without complaining as long as they get paid, and has no qualms about anything, and does exactly what they're told, and does it effortlessly and fully and functionally, right? And that is what Hans does, and that's what this entire story is doing, right? Is that the professor effectively exploring and colonizing, not to the extent of colonization, right? Because he's not setting up settlements and things, but right, but that becomes the goal, is that, oh, we're doing this just for research, right? And so like it to me, like the whole exploration part of the story feeds into this kind of mythos / desire of what Europeans think colonization is like, when it is in reality the complete and absolute destruction of the people that and civilizations and ecosystems that were already there and already living there. So that's that. Yeah. I don't know. I don't feel like there's a whole lot more to say on this, right? It's an adventure story. It has some interesting things, but it's not in of itself not incredibly interesting, right? It just is. And you get kind of this, it's fantastical and somewhat grounded, and using like science in a way that is like, oh, well, it's just a theory kind of deal. So that's that. That is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. I believe, if I recall correctly, of all the Jules Verne that I read as a young child, this was my least favorite, and currently is my least favorite. Partially because of this reason, because it's like, it is so fantastical in a way that I don't think it necessarily means to be, but that's that. That is Jules Verne.